That's all for the blooper reel. Okay, so the 4 triplet grids that we're going to use when we're working on swing coordination are going to be as follows. It's going to be a 1-note grid, then it's going to be 2 quarter notes, so two spaced apart. Then we have 2 eighth notes, which are going to be spaced apart either by the distance between an open swing, meaning the downbeat and the third beat of the triplet, or a closed swing, being the third note of the triplet and the next downbeat. And then the 4th grid is a dotted quarter note, eighth note grid, which will, just like the 2 eighth notes, be spaced out either by an open swing or a closed swing. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to start just with the 1-note swing grid, and I'm going to play it forward and stop. So 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, that's only taking the grid going forward. If you want to deepen your understanding of where it's at, you can also, once you've done taking it from count 1 to the Lee of 4, you can also go backwards with it. So instead of pushing the note of the grid forward by 1, you'll actually be subtracting 1 each time. So it's just a way for you to reinforce how you can use each one of these grid positions as a vocabulary concept instead of just being a spot. Okay, so I'm going to do this one more time, a little bit quicker, and I'm going to go forward and then backwards in the grid. So 5, 6, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so did that make sense? Cool. One thing you'll notice about that is every time I play a new part of the grid, I'm shooting for playing it no less than 3 times. Okay, like the instinct for us when we're doing this, if we're trying to get through an exercise, is we'll go, oh, I'll play it twice and then move on to the next piece of the grid. But if you get 3 times at least, you stand a better chance of really reaffirming it in your brain and in your muscle memory. And honestly, you can play it as many times as you need. If you are working on one and you come up across one that is just kicking your butt and you can't get the coordination, just stay there. Like, stay in it until you work out the different parts of the coordination. Now, there's a couple of things that I'm doing there to keep track of it. The biggest one is counting. Okay? You've got to be able to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 going in your head the entire time that you're doing this. And for some players, younger players, that's going to be the biggest trick of all, is because you want to just set your pattern and, you know, just kind of roll the dice, just kind of try to fit the notes in where they belong. But since this is a sequential coordination exercise, you've got to keep track of where count 1 is every time. Okay? All right, I'm going to move on to the 2 quarter note grid. And this time I will go immediately into playing it forward and then playing it backwards. Okay? 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that was kind of a crash and burn. I'll own that. You can see there, if you're not keeping track of where you're going, it's really easy to skip one of the orientations. And like, I'll go back and do the post-mortem after this, but I'm pretty sure that I skipped the 2 quarter notes that were on the Lee of 2 and the Lee of 3. So, you know, if that happens, it's almost certainly going to happen. It happens to everybody. The best thing that you can do is just kind of put pause on the exercise, but keep your swing time going. You know, like, if you need to just... And now, I'm back on 1, 5, 6. That one, much more successful, still had some hiccups in there, but I was able to remember where I was at and just get myself back on track. And if you did your homework where I had you write everything out, like write all of the positions of the swing grid out, you'll find that practicing this is loads easier. You know, like me doing it from memory is something I can do because I've done it so many times. I've gone through it so many times. So even if I have a little brain fart and I don't remember where I'm at, I can still, get back there because I've got that, both memory, and muscle memory. But if you're working on this for the first time, just stare it down on the page, like look at each one of the patterns and make sure that you're reading the ink. Read what you've got on the page, okay? Moving ahead, this is the 2/8 note grid. This one and the one after it I find much trickier than the other ones. So if I have some flubs, forgive me in advance. Here we go. 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Well, once again, as I was coming backwards through it, I started to reverse course and go back forwards through it. So I had to make a little correction within that. Quick thing to note when you're working on this, the way that I'm demonstrating this as far as sound levels go, like on my snare drum, that's probably inappropriate for a performance setting. Because if you're in a performance setting, these are all vocabulary ideas that you'd use. But you want to make sure that you're playing good dynamics and you're playing in a tasteful way where these can just be, commentary and interjection that you're having with the other members of the rhythm section. You don't want it to necessarily be these real big pops within the groove. So if you were playing it a little bit more tasteful, it might sound something more like this. 5, 6, 5, 6, 7. It kind of folds itself into the flow of the swing pattern. Okay, the two cymbal sounds are our main ideas when we're talking about a swing pattern, and then the bass drum is either in a supporting role by feathering, or we can use the bass drum in these grids as well, but that's something for a later date. All right, and then finally we have the dotted quarter eighth note grid. Also, real quick, if you hadn't noticed yet, in the two grids that we use where we are using, the three grids where we're using two notes, as you get further and further into the pattern, when you start these on like count 4, they're going to go across the bar line. So the second note doesn't actually live in the measure where it starts. And that can also be something that can trip you up, because then you're having to think of the entire phrase or the entire figure, across two measures. So make sure that you're keeping track. That's why counting to 4 while you're doing this, hugely important, okay? All right, this is the dotted quarter eighth note grid. A 5, 6, a 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, when we get through that one and we're going backwards with it, you start to recognize how much this applies to just music and musicality. Because as you have this rhythm, this figure that spaces out across basically 4 eighth notes worth of time, when we're going forward, there's a total of 9 eighth notes between each pattern, because the first one starts on count 1, and then when we move to the next pattern, it's on the and of 1, the lee of 1. So that's a total distance of 9. With me? Okay. When we go backwards, it is a distance of 7. Because, for example, if the first note is on the and of 4, because that's the point when we start going backwards, and of 4. Well, every time we go to the next and of 4, that's 8 eighth notes, 1 full measure. But when we go to 4 after the and of 4, that's a spacing of 7 eighth notes. Okay? When you're dealing with a pattern like the dotted quarter eighth note, then that is a figure that's spaced out by 4 eighth notes. So you only have 3 eighth notes worth of space to feel where the next pattern is going to be at. Okay, so it really makes your brain be on top of things, and it also starts to make these things really sound like music, which is the whole reason behind this exercise. Yes, we're working on coordination, but we also want to make this sound like music. We want to make this sound like something that we could, sit down with the band and play, And the really cool part about this is once you have the mastery of all these figures, these grid figures, you'll find yourself being able to piece them together the same way that, when you're learning to read or when you're learning to write, you have to be able to piece letters into words and then words into sentences and so on and so forth. So you'll start to hear yourself, if this is your vocabulary, that's all of those different grid ideas that we were working with, and I'm just using them one after another. I'm kind of picking and choosing which one that I want to use. And all these things are dependent on having a good ear and being able to listen to what the other members of your rhythm section are doing. Because if you're playing with a pianist that is, super busy and playing a lot of comp figures, maybe playing something more sparse and picking and choosing your spots is going to be more musically appropriate. If the pianist is being real loose and really hanging back and only playing a couple of comps at most per measure, then you might be able to be a little bit busier with this stuff. If it's someone that you're playing with that you've got a great rapport with and you really know their feel and like how they like to play, you might actually be able to, find ways for these patterns to really line up and correspond and have some nice strong moments, almost like a unison hit with these grid figures. It all depends on your situation. Okay?